And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. My honor today to have on Don Arnold from Maryland Community Church in Terre Haute, Indiana. Don, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. Excited to be with you.
Yeah, so in this episode, we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of starting and leading a foster care ministry. And when I think of partnership opportunities in our communities, an opportunity to shine the light of Jesus, foster care is just one of those very obvious ones. We all sense the crisis in our communities, the breakdown of the family, the needs of children that are in a vulnerable situation. And we see James 1:27. This is the church's issue. This is something we should jump into. Met Dawn recently and was just blessed by all that her church is doing, all that she's doing in the foster care space. And what we try to answer on this podcast is, what do we do now? What do we do next? How do we practically impact our communities? I was just so blessed by our conversation. Wanted to kind of bring that to the audience. So Dawn is the outreach director at Maryland Community Church. She has a degree in child development and family life from Indiana State University. Her family's worked in childcare for a number of years, and then God really moved her heart over into the foster care space and how the church could make a difference. So Dawn, there's just kind of a brief intro there. Anything that I missed that you might add, just your background and current ministry?
I think that my current ministry right now is my loving on my family of 7. I have 3 biological and 4 adopted kiddos. And so that is my full-time ministry. But all of the other fun stuff that God calls me to do through MCC and Fostering Hope is just kind of the icing on the cake, really.
Well, so you heard it, listeners, like right out of the gate. This is not something that she just thinks about. This is not something she just wrote a book about. No, like she lives this every day. And that was one of the things that just like, not just the church, but her family. We're going to get into the church culture at MCC, which fascinates me and blesses me. But Don, if you would just jump in and maybe share a brief story, just some recent way that God is using your ministry.
Sure. Yeah. We started Fostering Hope, which is the overarching ministry of how we care for kids and families in our city from hard spaces. But about 3 weeks ago, we were provided the opportunity to walk alongside one of a DCS employee through the loss of a child. And to tell you that we ever dreamed or prayed for a day like that would have been an understatement. We were hoping when we launched the ministry just to clean some visit rooms and provide some coffee and, pray for them every once in a while. But it was immediate when this tragedy happened that caseworkers just started reaching out. I mean, I got a text at 6:30 in the morning, like, this has happened. Can you guys pray? And so our staff went into prayer, and through the course of 2 weeks before the boy passed away, we were just in constant conversation with the director, with employees. And then at the end of it, we were able to host about a 45-minute grief and healing service for about 30 of the FCMs, the supervisors and directors that chose to come. Our local director even closed the office so that her staff could come if they wanted to. And it's one of those places we call around our church family the thin spaces where heaven and earth just barely touch. It was one of those thin spaces where we were able to see God real and moving within the staff. And so we are grateful for the trust that director gave us, and also for the individuals that showed up.
What a remarkable story. And I imagine most listeners are familiar with, in a sense, kind of I would describe it as the side eye that when I get a lot, church leaders and individuals from the Department of Child Services get in a room together. Sometimes there's kind of a side eye. I think there's a lot of history there with the church was, I think, initially tasked with caring for those in need. In some ways, we kind of withdrew from that. I think there has been some kind of pushing as well. But just sometimes coming from a different worldview, we just don't get each other. And these two institutions, church and state, are called to be partners, not opponents. And just the ministry opportunity, I think, because we're so used to this, just kind of glaring at one another, miss that ministry opportunity. So that's just beautiful. And you've been in your role now, my understanding is 10 years. And that sort of ministry, I know listeners, pastors, that doesn't happen overnight. That's relationship over time, just pouring into people. And so thank you for leading in that way and kind of showing us as well, hey, this is possible for our churches. So what a beautiful opportunity there. So I mentioned just a little bit of the history. As we jump into this, I just wanted to emphasize, as we talked with Governor Holcomb, asking what are the problems the state of Indiana. The first one that he mentioned was foster care, and I have found through colleagues around the country, speaking churches around the country, speaking in a church in Minnesota over the weekend, uh, this is everywhere because it's a human need, and if the church has turned inward at times, if the family is breaking down, the kids are the one bearing the brunt a lot of this. I know our numbers are back up to about 13,000 children in foster care in our state. And when I look at just wide open opportunities for our churches to engage, foster care is right there at the top. And so with this episode, I really wanted to, for the pastor that's, hey, I feel a burden, and I've got folks in my pews that I feel a burden for this. Where do I start? But then those that may have been engaged for a while, I think there's something here for you as well. So let's start maybe with just the church. You have a church, I know that's a growing church there around Terre Haute, Indiana. What led the church to impact foster care to begin this ministry?
So we had a pastor on our staff that had been just really burdened for kids from hard spaces is kind of the language that we use because we're really working on the prevention, intervention, and preservation side of foster care. So we try to give a real holistic kind of lane that people can jump in on. And so Pastor Dan was a CASA, and he was doing some things. He and his wife kind of had started fostering. And through that, he just let everybody in to see the real hard and the real good of foster care. And so that was probably in 2014, 2015. And through just him living very open-handedly with life, he just started gathering other people who would say, well, I'll try foster care. And so there was a small just band of foster parents that started that my husband and I got in kind of on the tail end of what we call the OG of Fostering Hope. So the original gang.
Okay.
And at that point, it was about 2017 that we just started putting some formality to it and seeing people who were just by nature caring for these foster families. But they were the people who also would say, like, I don't feel called to foster, but I feel called to help. And so that's kind of where the ministry started, was just a real proximity, I would say, on Pastor Dan and Bethany's part of being one with the congregation. Like they were allowing people to care for them. And so we were able to then kind of grow grassroots by knowing that there were people fostering and people that were wanting to help.
It's a beautiful story, just born out of going out and doing something and then just kind of seeing where God takes it. That language, CASA, court appointed special advocate, being there in a court case involving foster kids where you are there to represent the interests of the child, and then for him to take it kind of to the rest of the church. So what was kind of that first step? And what I'm thinking of here is, again, that pastor's like, hey, I want to do this. I have no idea where to start. And so what was kind of that first step?
So we just, we at MCC, we really love partnering with other churches. And so we just started looking around the state really and seeing who was doing something in foster care. And for us, that was Traders Point. And so they connected us with Hands of Hope, which is a kind of a state organization that really helps to structure and advocate for kids. They have some international adoption stuff, foster care, just all across the board, but they empower churches to really care well for families and kids from hard spaces. And so at that time, the thing that they were doing was care communities. And so we began asking for help from other churches and just said, could you walk us through how you got started? And so care communities was what that was at Traders, and through Hands of Hope, they came in and trained us. And care communities was how MCC specifically got started in foster care. And that means that we just, we talked to our congregation about the heart of foster care. We highlighted a few foster parents that were in our congregation. So things were very real to them. We knew those people's names and faces. They knew the kids that were getting checked into kids ministry. And we said to them, what would it look like if we formalized this and said, hey, you're going to be on this team? So it was usually 4 to 5 couples that walked alongside a foster family for the length of the placement. And it looked like childcare, meals once a week, maybe lawn mowing, laundry. It was extremely, extremely practical. And we launched that Fostering Hope ministry in 2017 through Care Communities. And we had about 275 people that showed up for our first training,
Wow.
which was way too many to hold in the room that we had planned.
That's awesome.
We then, at that point, supported about 23 foster families, some from our congregation, and we had to call DCS and say, "Excuse me, but do you have anybody who needs some support?"
Mm.
So that is how we started. It's that if CAFO, the Christian Alliance for Orphans, is an organization that we use as support and education, and they have a tagline that everybody can do something, and that's really the heart of how. In all honesty, that's how we got started. We just said, "Hey, this is the scripture base. This is what God's called us to." The James 1:27, same one you used, and then we just said, "Here's some options, but everybody can do something. You don't get a pass." And so from there, we just began to build the ministry.
Yeah, there's so much there. And it may be as simple. It's a ministry like Hands of Hope, and longtime listeners know that Susie Roth, the leader of Hands of Hope, has been on a couple times. One to talk about foster care, one to talk about their outreach into Ukraine.
Yeah.
But there are ministries doing this, and so there's no need to kind of recreate the wheel here. That there are ministries that serve the church in this way. They have existing relationships with DCS and other agencies, and they do this all the time. So that this is a great way to get connected with them. But then you mentioned that care community model, and when I kind of came to this space initially, it was this kind of like, well, duh, but when I had thought about it before, it's like, all right, you've got to be a family that's in the season of life with kids, and you bring other children into your home. Like, those are the only Christians that can serve. But as you mentioned, this is bringing a casserole. Give a date
Right.
night to foster mom and dad. And one of my favorite stories about care communities is a pastor that had a group in his church. It's just an elderly small group, and they enjoyed meeting each week to roast the pastor. The music is too loud. They don't like the paint color. You know how it can go. And if I'm not careful in my own heart, I can do that too. So, but
You get
he
older.
introduced care communities to this group, and they took all of that energy and just put it right into serving kids. And so this pastor was the biggest fan of care communities. But then Traders Point would be another church here in Indiana that does this well. And so it may be as simple as reaching out to this other group, or reaching out to your local DCS director and saying, we would just organically, we'd like to come around some foster families. And generally, as soon as you say, how can we help? They're like, we have a place for you.
Yeah.
You've talked some about the buy-in from the members of the church and just kind of standing that up. But you discussed or mentioned to me just how this has fundamentally changed the culture of MCC and even like the leadership. Would you explain a little bit of how that has happened?
Yeah, it's man, I struggle to not get emotional. It's shifted the way that we do church. Our church is middle to upper class. In one of our campuses, one of them is a campus, maybe a little bit of up and coming neighborhood. And so as we added, individuals that are coming in, we're starting to see such a diverse need from our congregation for different things. And since we've started Fostering Hope, the kind of scales on our eyes of what needs could be and how we meet them has shifted from such a monetary, like, oh, well, we'll just pay for them to get counseling, or, oh, we'll just buy them some food. It has literally shifted to why don't we take them food? Why don't we meet them where they're at and walk alongside them in life? Because we tell the stories of the extremes, like this has happened, and these are why these kids are removed. And so in the real time as we're walking our families through the things that happen within care communities and Hope House and the other ministries that we have under Fostering Hope, they're able to think on the preventative side of like, well, what if we step into the hard space before DCS has to step in? What if we help them when right before they got homeless, you know? And so because we use use foster care as a way to gain proximity to our hurting in the city, then people are thinking differently about how we help, making it more relational and less monetary. And that's what God's done, is bless the heart of the people, because it's really shifted to more of a kingdom work and less of a worldly, just throwing money at something that we know is not the answer. We have our senior pastor is excellent about telling stories within confidentiality. We get a lot of approval from DCS before we share those. But we have 1 year, not 2 years ago, we had 14 adoptions within Fostering Hope within our ministry. And so we celebrate those things. And so we're seeing a return on what we celebrate.
That's awesome. And you had mentioned that in like any given staff meeting, there's often like there's just openness to somebody's going to have a foster placement. And so like they may not have slept the night before and the baby may be screaming, but you guys are just doing ministry together. Would you mention a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So when we started Fostering Hope, Pastor Dan was the only one fostering at the time. And as he's just shared life, then I started fostering, and we had 2 other pastors at the time that were fostering. So within our lead team, half of us were fostering. And so, like you just mentioned, my husband and I, not by our choice, but have had 7 placements. They've all been newborns. And so we shifted the staff guidelines in our code. So in a sense, I took my kids to work with me because they couldn't start daycare until they were 6 weeks old based on state regulations. And so I would have a newborn in a lead team meeting. And when I'd go to a meeting that maybe a baby couldn't go, my receptionist watched them or my assistant watched them. And so it transformed our office. We get time off for court now. We, like I said, get to bring them to work. We definitely, another thing we have around our office is we eat our own dog food, in the sense that like, we don't ask you to do something that we're not willing to do. And that's really comes from our senior pastor. And so he's made a way for us to be able to do those things, and still be in ministry.
I thought that was such a beautiful example of the love of Christ. And like you said, just, hey, we're not going to stand on stage on Sunday and say, hey, you guys should do this. Rather, you're doing it as well. This fascinates me because I was actually just came off of a call with a national philanthropic organization, lots of money, trying to figure out how do we solve some of our nation's worst problems more from the ground up rather than the top down. And they of course have all of these models and things, but the way that they're trying to shift the paradigm is from care coordination to care sharing. Like, just like you said, like not paying for it, but rather sharing it. I was just kind of laughing, like, yeah, there's this organization, it's described in this book called ACTS. It's been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad you guys are catching up, but it's been around for a little while. Yeah. So I literally just jumped off of that call, so it was on top of mind. Yeah. So next, I'd like to walk through a little bit, because you mentioned you don't want to come into something and just continue to throw resources and not see significant change. And what I was just blessed by is your ministry is very strategic. And so if you would just walk from the prevention space into actual, okay, if a kid's been pulled out and is in foster care, and then restoration. So if you would just kind of walk through those different pieces of the ministry.
Sure. I will walk you through it, like specifically how we programmatically have structured ourselves. And so Fostering Hope is kind of the umbrella ministry. And underneath that, there are a few programs. And as we have built relationship with DCS, we go in a couple times a year and we just literally say, what do you need from them? So I guess that's the most strategic thing we do, is we don't try to tell them what they need. We ask them what they need. And so through that, these kind of 4 ministry programs have been built. The first one is care communities, which we've already talked through, and that came from a need of support and retention from the DCS director at our local level. And then the next thing that we added kind of to the umbrella was a ministry called Hope House. What we were seeing, and this was actually during COVID, what we were seeing was that in our county specifically, caseworkers and kiddos were staying the night at our DCS office. And that just seemed just it was just too much, honestly, to be able to think through. And so we had a space at our church, 12 Points building, that was a home. It was kind of like, if you think parsonage, it was kind of just to the north of our building. And so we actually flipped that into about 3 big living rooms. And that space started 2 years ago. It started out, we thought, would be a space just for emergency removal. So kids getting pulled in the middle of the night and the caseworkers needing somewhere to take them that was home-like. We had again, these three living rooms and then a fully functional kitchen. I kept food stocked and all that, showers. And so then we weren't seeing as great of a need for that, but people are asking us to reserve the space during the day for supervised visits. And so to date, we have had this year, we've had 87 children stay the night at Hope House. These are just individuals, so unique people. We're not counting days. Some stay up to 72 hours. And then we have had over 300 recorded supervised visit hours. So the home, the caseworkers, service providers, and FCN, DCS are able to check the room out for free and have visits there. The win, honestly, for that, Josh, what we thought was going to be that these kids were going to come in, have a fun, shame-free space to play, to love on their families. And that is a nice additive for that. But the greatest growth we've seen is in our relationship with the actual service providers and DCS, because their job is oppressive and so hard. And so what a joy it is to have the door open. We kind of have a cliched when we open the door, we're like, we're so glad you're here. You know, when you're here, you're home. Our hosts use all of those language. We always have coffee going. We always have iced tea. We always have a snack. One of our hosts, actually our director, he could rattle off the last 20 people that have come into Hope House. He knows how they like their coffee. It's bananas.
Wow.
But that's what God's called him to serve. And what's even crazier is he's legally blind. He takes an Uber every day to Hope House to run Hope House. He's one of those that shouldn't be serving because it doesn't make sense. And he exhausts every effort to get there. So there's just so much ministry that goes on at Hope House that is opposite of what we thought.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I know you're going to go into the next one, but just to put something here, I have been in a number of DCS offices. It is not, this is not a knock on DCS. You have a limited government budget, but it is what you would expect. It's a fairly stale office building. Kids are facing the worst day in their life, and that's where they're having to sleep. And even the visits, I mean, there are toys there, but it is what it is. It's a government office. You know that you're there. You've got somebody watching you with your kids. And something we talk often about in this space is giving people dignity. I mean, the fact that they're being supervised and maybe they're addicted to drugs or something doesn't change the fact that they're an image bearer. And I haven't seen the space, but I think of Isaiah 117 house that came out of Tennessee. They're doing some of the same stuff. These are beautiful dignity, producing spaces. And what an incredible story. This individual is blind, and yet he knows how these workers take their coffee. Like, this is, having been in this space, like, this is such a paradigm shift. And so I'm just so blessed, and I hope the listeners can sense that too. Just incredible. So I kind of stopped you from moving on, but
it's okay. So you talked about Isaiah 117. That's another thing that we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. We reached out to them, and there were parts of their model that they were doing that we really wanted to be more volunteer led than staff led. And so that was the only shift, is that there is not a staffed person like their model runs. And so that's really the only difference, is that we just chose to kind of put a different name on it. And what's cool is we've had people from our counties, Sullivan, Park, Clay, in our region that are working on opening Hope houses. So we are willing to like
Oh,
give
okay.
the model. We kind of walked alongside Cooper House, which is in
Yeah.
Noblesville. I don't know if you're familiar, but Brooke was amazing at helping us get started. So there's other
Okay.
ministries that people could lean on if they have a space at their church. Even
Yeah.
we are talking to one church about opening a Hope room. You don't have to have a
Hmm.
house. If you have a receptionist and an empty nursery room that you don't use during the week, you can do that. And we
Yeah.
again we're an open door. So if anybody has any questions or wants help getting started, we would love to walk alongside them.
We'll have contact info in the show
Yeah.
notes, a link to the church website. And I think that idea was worth the price of admission, right? And I'm huge on how do you impact your own zip code? And it's kind of like churches, all right, I can learn from a church that's in a different state, but like how does this iterate here and what's going to be best for here? So yeah, beautiful model and just the stories that are coming out of that. It's just amazing. So that's the kind of initial removal and then helping with supervised visits. What's the next piece?
Yeah. So actually, in 2 weeks, we are going to be opening the next kind of leg or program underneath Fostering Hope, and that is called Family Refuge. Family Refuge. Honestly, my background, I told you, is in early childhood and was a real struggle. Me and God, arm wrestled about getting back into childcare, but He was very clear that that was the next step. What we see often at Hope House is that these families fight for restoration. They get to a place where they're at trial home visit, they are reunified, and all of the support and structure that was given there through intervention, so through the
Yeah.
open case, goes away. A lot of the agencies are required to step away for 6 months and not have any interaction. And so what does that feel like and look like for a family who has grown to trust these caseworkers in some situations? Most of them, when reunification is the end goal, they've built up a friendship. And so then they can't. And so we felt God calling us into childcare, but childcare with a very targeted audience. So we are looking at working with families from hard spaces, so they can come in or out of intervention in an open case or an IA, and they get priority. We're holding space for them at a child care center that has 50 spots.
Wow.
And so the goal, the hope, is that we will meet them while the case is still open, that the foster family would advocate for them to be in a child care center that prioritizes relationship, and that they would be able to then come join Family Refuge. It's 6 weeks through school age. And then through those relationships, through the education, trauma-informed care that the teachers will be getting, they're not only building a relationship with the child and providing safety, but their focus is building a relationship with that mom and dad. And we're structuring once a quarter, they'll be required to keep their spot to attend a face-to-face parent education meeting. We have what we call gatherings or hangouts, fun events, Christmas parties, so that we are constantly creating proximity for our teachers and our families to find new friends that are healthy, because that's the hardest part. A lot of times these mamas and daddies have to step away from everything and everybody that they knew if they choose sobriety. And so how can the church, like you said, the Acts church, be willing to lay it all down and say, this is what I have, this is the space I have, this is a relationship I have, and then really work together. And so that is the heartbeat behind Family Refuge. But the attractional piece is childcare, because we know we can draw them in by saying, hey, we're going to provide care from 7:30 to 5 while you go, get a job or go back to school or whatever it is that they need.
Well, and imagine first that's a financial investment from the church, because government dollars dropping off, and you're helping people in hard spaces. But then just the thought of helping. We often talk of this thing called the cliff effect with government benefits, but it happens with these types of court cases too, where you would think, coming out of poverty, you would then have, kind of a ramp onto, all right, we're going to get off of that, but it is literally a cliff. And so a lot of people come up to the edge of that cliff, look down, like, nope, I'm going back. The same thing here. It's just so much easier to go back to your peer group, to get back into the life that you had before, and and then we circle back into the system. So this is a remarkable model, and I look forward to seeing it being reproduced other places as well.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
yeah,
that's
we're excited and scared,
yeah.
not to lie.
Yes, and so that launches when?
We actually started the process because of the licensure process. We're a state
Sure.
licensed childcare facility back in December, but we open August 5th. So
Okay.
we have about 20 kids right now on our wait list. In a sense, they have a spot. They're not waiting, but that's how many kids we've got enrolled. And it's going to be so good. We've already seen the Lord's hand in it.
Well, and just even having childcare taken care of. And one of the things I noticed, or anybody in this space notices, is that you have all these appointments that you have to keep. You have to have the job, have to have the house. But then in some places, and this would be true around the country too, if trying to find affordable quality childcare, you have 6-month waiting lists.
Right.
And so there is a sense like you come out of a system, all right, I got my kids back, but then just like the weight of all of these things hitting you at the same time. So I just so much of this just blesses me. You know, let's take that one off the table. Like you focus
Yeah.
on the other things. We got this one for you. What an
Yeah.
amazing way to
And
serve.
we hired a full-time social worker. Her title is community coordinator, but she will be working specifically with DCS at the place where they're starting their child home visit, so that we're already aligning, filling out a CCDF voucher, which is how they would get the government subsidy for childcare. If they don't have their driver's license, let's establish all of these things so that we don't see reentry. And so that was one of I think that's going to be the key, is that Andrea's her name. That's her sole job, is to build relationship and fill in holes and not give any excuses for, I don't have gas money, or I don't know how to, I don't have a copier. You have to give everything but your blood type to get a childcare voucher. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, and I was kind of one thing I try to do is thinking about nuts and bolts. As ministries do have to consider the financial piece, and so the childcare voucher, that makes sense. It would kick in for that.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the church side, and I imagine we'll circle back, because as you ask DCS, what's your need? That answer may change over time, and I love how the church just keeps pivoting. All right, what's the biggest need, and we're going to stand up a way to actually serve that need. But then there's also the DCS side, and one of the reasons I came to Terre Haute initially is Director Stignan, the former director of the Department of Child Services, mentioned to us a real concern about Terre Haute. Now, every community in the United States getting hit hard by the drug crisis, so it's no knock on Terre Haute. Indiana State University is there, but that the removal rate in Terre Haute, it's really nowhere close to the largest city in the state, is one of the worst in the state, and so just really hard hit. And you've mentioned just throughout all of this, the relationships you've been building with DCS. But I'd be interested, how did you start that? You mentioned that they're literally texting you when one of those caseworkers lost a son. Any advice for pastors that are looking to start that or deepen those relationships, some practical ways they can build into it?
Yeah, I mean, it is as simple, Josh, as just being available. We went and asked for a meeting. It's a different season than when we started, to be really honest, back in 2017, and really kind of that 2015 to 2017 as we were forming the ministry. We couldn't even get a meeting with our DCS director. I mean, it was hard. And so there was a lot of prayer that went into that. But I do feel like the temperature has changed, in the sense that there are more churches doing something. And so I think that right now, more than ever, there would be a better opportunity for the local church to reach out to their county director or region director and just say, hey, we're working with Hands of Hope. We're working with, and so maybe building some of the relationships first with the organizations like Hands of Hope. If they're in Region 8, this is not a prideful statement, I promise you to say, but our office, our region, they know what fostering hope is. And so we're more than welcome to be a part of a conversation if a church wants that. And we could even help connect. So I would say that by all means, write out relationship with some of the churches that are doing things. And then you have to set all pride aside and just do what they ask you to do. We cleaned visit rooms for about 3 years. Wow. I don't think we did anything else. Yeah, we didn't. And then when COVID hit, the very first thing they let us do that was not cleaning visit rooms once a month, twice a quarter, was the director reach out and said, "Hey, this is so silly, but by any chance, do you have anybody that would sew us some masks?" And I was like, "Tomorrow we will have 100 masks on your doorstep." And I
Wow.
don't, so I just took a real big leap of faith. And we found and or bought 100 masks.
Awesome.
So it's being ready to go when they give and ask, and not being like, well, we don't really want to do childcare, but we will provide you a meal. Well, there's a lot of red tape in churches providing food, buying things for the state, and so we don't think that through, right? We're the church
Mhm.
that's like, oh, we'll bring
Yeah.
you a casserole, and the state's like, we can't take your money. Anyway, all that to say, just being available for what they actually want and need instead of us telling them what they needed. And that has been the game changer. I went to the director's supervisor meeting on Thursday by invitation, just because she's like, hey, I just want you to be present and available in case there's something that one of the
Wow.
supervisors need, or a way that you can see Fostering Hope interjecting in some of the needs of these families. And so it was so surreal. I'm like, I'm literally sitting in the DCS meeting with all these supervisors, and they trust us.
Yes.
But it's been a season of just laying groundwork.
And for ministry leaders, I mean, this is what we do all the time. It's developing trust, right? And that's what was going on. Like, oh, you want to help? And it sometimes it can even be a little bit of a test,
It is.
and like,
It,
and, well, like cleaning rooms. I mean, that's kind of beneath us. Why are we doing this? But it's exactly that. It's you're building trust, and then they give you a little more. And if you're faithful to that, yeah. So I just thought it was just such a beautiful example of how it works in every other ministry space. If for whatever reason we just like, oh, we can't apply that in partnering with government,
right.
but your ministry has shown that it's just how it works. They're folks, they're people too. So any thoughts on you, of course, opening this child care center in August? Anything else that I'm just interested in Dawn's brain? Like, what as you're looking towards the future? Is there anything else that you're thinking about?
So we really feel like we've kind of got a hand in each one of those, like prevention, intervention, and preservation type areas right now. And so what we're working on now, and some of them are already going, but is laying a bedrock of what we are calling support services. And so this is not MCC making or envisioning a new program. We're just looking around and saying, oh, what is happening that works good and can support. And so what those look like to us practically right now is that we are doing Care Portal. And Care Portal is an amazing way to activate your church congregation to serve in a real, tangible way. And just basically what Care Portal is a platform for caseworkers, so DCS caseworkers in real time, to put in needs. So they're out in the field and they go into a home where they're taking an assessment and they're like, man, these kids wouldn't have to be removed if we had a bed, if this utility bill was paid. So there's not there may be a neglect from a poverty perspective need, but it's not abuse. It's not,
Yeah.
maybe not even drug related. And so the caseworker can put that in, and the partnering churches that there is some cost, but then buy into this platform, they're able to see the need in real time and say, oh, I have a bed. I'll pay this bill, I'll whatever. And so we've had Care Portal for about a year and a half now. Last year, we provided 100 beds to our community just in Vigo County.
Wow.
And the secret sauce, the best thing about Care Portal is that DCS, they put in the need and we accept the need, but that we relationally get to go get the item. We have a garage that we use, so we keep inventory in there. So we get the item, we physically take it to the family's house. If it's a bed, we go in, we put it together if they'll allow us. We ask if we can pray for them, and we work on building a relationship with the actual family. Through that, the same gentleman who I said was running our Hope House, he was blind. He also runs Care Portal. Again, he is
Wow.
amazing,
Huh.
but because he can do all the phone calls. And so he also has partnered with a clothes closet and a food bank and all that. So he's not only meeting their tangible Care Portal need, but he's now connecting them with all the other agencies that we've just built relationship with. So that's one great way. And if a church wants to even start that way, there is somebody that will come in and train you to do that.
Wow.
Um, it is elective by the state of Indiana on what counties can have care portals. So it can't just be, oh, we're, whatever county, let's just say Park County right now in our region. It's based on removal rate. So the state has to kind of dictate who uses care portal. But that's
And
one. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and we've been just grateful to see that continue to expand. It is expanding nationally. Actually started, we had Doug Weinberg was an individual that actually helped bring it kind of from Nebraska over to Indiana. But it is expanding nationally. So the churches anywhere that they might listen to this can just, we'll have a link in the website you can see. And
Yeah.
if it's not there, you can often kind of lobby a state legislator or somebody that in state government to bring it. So yeah, I love that you show up as Maryland Community Church. Hey, we'd like to give this bed to you. It's just a beautiful thing.
And what's the plus to that, honestly, Josh, is that there are 4 other churches within Vigo County that do Care Portal. So we meet, we all talk, we've kind of gotten our niche now. There's church unity that's happening. And so now when we show up, we have a little gift bag that has some snacks, and we've created we call it a one-sheeter that has all the church information, all of the kids ministry programming. So no matter where we're going in the city, we're saying, hey, we don't even say we're from Maryland Community Church anymore. We just say we're from Care Portal. And so we're not only highlighting the ministry that's happening at our church, but we're highlighting it at World Gospel and Valley Church and Cross Lane. Those are the 4 churches in our city. And so it gives me goosebumps to think about the unity happening among the church, because quite honestly, before I worked at the church, that would have been one thing I would have never thought was an issue. And church unity is hard.
Well, I love that. If they're preaching the gospel, and that family's probably not going to drive 25 minutes across town.
Right.
Right. So hey, here's a church that's just next to you. Wow. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
other things real quick that we do, I'll breeze through if you don't mind, is Sleep in Heavenly Peace, which is another national organization that provides bed making and volunteer opportunities. Are you familiar with Sleep in Heavenly Peace?
Just the name I've heard before. I love this. So they'll come in and help with that effort.
Yeah, it's really cool because it's 2 components. One, they kind of divide it out by monthly. That's how our chapter does. We just actually acquired the chapter, but they have 1 month that they do a build day. So you can have church volunteers, like Chick-fil-A has come and volunteered with our Sleep in Heavenly Peace. But it's like the Legos of beds, if that makes any sense. They mass produce 50 beds in one day, and they have all these kind of like stations set up, and it's just, Lowe's is a large backer. They donate the lumber. And so then Sleep in Heavenly Peace equips the chapters with tools and all of that. And they build beds 1 month. And then the next month they blitz the community and they'll deliver those 50 beds or however many beds have come in by application. And it's the same process as Care Portal. You go into the home, you put the bed together, you pray with the family if they'll allow, and you hand out this, we give the same one-sheeter. So it's a way to kind of be a preventative or, a preservation piece. And then we also provide trauma-informed care classes to our community, which has been huge. We got somebody that is certified and from Trauma Free World, and so she's providing classes to not only our foster families, but to our DCS staff and school corporation.
Well, so yeah, there's we could keep going and going. There's so much here of just innovative ways. Going back to what is the church's mission? Let's give people dignity. Let's connect them into community. But then let's work with the state to. And one of the nice things about, I think this is the way that God created it. He actually created the state, we know, to punish evil and promote good. The church fulfilled the Great Commission, do good works that point to Jesus. Those are supposed to be puzzle pieces. And I think one of the beautiful things about how God set that up is his ministers for our good. They're boots on the ground every day seeing these needs. And so it's actually helpful not to just go guess. Like you look at the problems in a community and like just guess what's wrong. Like, let's go talk to them and then collaborate on making a difference. So I'm just so grateful of everything that we've heard today, of the ministry to the DCS workers, of how this has impacted the church's culture. And you think about a church that's really trying to engage the next generation, that loves to volunteer, wants to see not just what Christianity says, but what it does. These are all just amazing opportunities. So now, if you had a message on which to put a message, a billboard on which to put a message to the broader church, what would you put on it?
This is fun. So everyone who knows me, they call me Mama Dawn. It's just
Okay.
kids, like it was kind of it's just what it is. And so I have this saying that I have said to my kids since the day I kind of pushed them out the van into public school. And I just say the world is noisy. And so you don't need to talk about Jesus as much as you need to show him. And so this question was an easy one for me in the sense that, I believe that. I think that there will be more people who come to know Christ because they see it in us and feel it in us before they ever hear about it. And so I want to spend the rest of my days thawing the ground for whomever may come after me to plant a seed, because I feel like that's kind of my burden, is to love people where they're at and not try to figure out the what's next for them. Because I do think that's what Christ would do.
Amen. Well, it's so encouraging. And I'm just thinking about how doing that so well in your area has produced those. I love how you framed it, those thin spaces where kind of heaven and earth come together, and where you were able to minister to so well to folks that probably wouldn't have darkened the door of a church in another scenario. And so we will in the link have in the show notes have links to Fostering Hope. And so if you're interested, just take a look at this webpage. There's lots of links there. It'll take you to some of these different efforts, also some contact information. So thank you for all that you're doing for the body of Christ and for joining us today to share about starting and leading foster care ministry.
Yeah. Thank you.